This is an HDR picture. That is the same picture with our profile in HDR. Hello everyone, this is Giuseppe from Cobalt Image, and today we will talk about our new Spectre profile, fully supporting the HDR pipeline. As we know, HDR are, let's say, the future for our monitors, for videos, or color spaces, and my personal opinion, I was not particularly interested in HDR photography. I associated HDR with the exaggerate processing, artificial contrast, and type of image that, simply did not belong to the way I photograph. What changed my mind was not reading about HDR or looking demonstration. Even in TV shop you can see the difference. I was seeing my own photographer on a proper HDR display. That was the first real interesting approach on HDR. I'm using, Apple devices like new iPad Pro, the new MacBook Pro, and even the iPhones, and all them have HDR display with a super high HDR capability. And right now I'm recording this video using my photography dedicated monitor. It's a ViewSonic with a very early support on HDR10. So instead of having 1600 nits of luminance like the most advanced HDR devices by Apple, I'm only managing 300 to 400, no more, just to show you even the starting point of the HDR effect when you apply a proper profile with your pictures with a, an old monitor for HDR, not perfect monitor for HDR. This is to prove you, even you not even using your HDR device, fully quality device, or if you never had the time on the wheel to click this button to test it, if you have our profiles, if you don't have, to test also with the Adobe starter profile. As you can see, there's quite a difference even with Adobe, because the monitor right now is the main device for our picture, the main. Before printing, before publishing, before projecting, whatever you want to do with your picture, the monitor is the first approach, the first dock for your picture. And having an extended dynamic range, an extended range from the HDR device is a big jump. And I suggest every one of you to try it, to use it, and to know it. Let's start describing the process before going deep on our profiles. This image, honestly, it's a revolution. The jump you get once you click HDR. And still using the Adobe basic color, the Adobe base profile, and let's say that before starting the full review, the full description, I'm not even touching the white balance, and you know how important is the white balance to really appreciate the Spectre profile. I'm not touching it. I'm leaving everything like as shot at some, developed settings, so we can just concentrate and focus on HDR only. When you have the picture, you develop the picture, you always have this marker for black point and white point. I always go a bit more to have more punch. If you don't like it, you can reduce it, moving, of course, the sliders. We know that. The base Adobe profile, basically, when you push this button, it's getting all the part of the highlights of the HDR image. It's extending and pushing it over the HDR range. What's the HDR range? My system is calculating that 300 to 400 nits, it's one stop, 1.1 stop, and that's it. 1.1 stop, it's this distance. Over this distance is the range that you can push and enjoy on your screen when you have a more modern monitor, like as I said before, an Apple device, a modern Asus, other brands. All the quantum device profiles, the devices, basically they support from 3 to 5 stops. Let's say 1200 to 1800 nits means 5 stop and more of headroom on highlights. It's an impressive number. We can't do that on this monitor because the early HDR support, so this is the HDR. I'm visualizing it. Where is the HDR range? And I want to push it inside the limit of my monitor. And to do this, I need to stay inside this space. And that's it. This is the HDR by Adobe, extending the upper part of the histogram to this part of the HDR range. What's changing using our profile? We know about the white balance, the accuracy. It's a spectral profile, so it's a super engineered profile. I call it super profile because it's giving so much. But let's forget about the plus you get. What's the difference on HDR? Yeah, the difference is that. Let's compare creating another image so you can see what difference gives you. Okay. The first is Adobe and the second is Cobalt. On this image, the HDR details basically comes from the shiny part of the image, so the swords and the helmet, as you can see. The extension is covering all this part of the image. The difference between Adobe and a proper HDR profile is that the proper HDR profile extends the 3/4 of the SDR histogram inside the bigger area available. So all the SDR, the big part of this SDR, it's extended, completely extended to the HDR area covered. So the calculation of the color, the matrix color, are covering also the HDR area. So it's not just a push inside the area, but it's a starting point of the calculation of the metric. So you can see the colorimetry and the quality of the color coming also in the extension, in the HDR extension. That's the first perk of the Spectre HDR profile. And this is the result. As you can see, the second image is basically jumping off the monitor. I have many samples here. I don't want to spend so much time for each image. I just want to show you before and after pushing the HDR button. Sometimes it's not big deal, you know. That image I took from London on sunrise is in Adobe. If I push HDR, the extension basically reduces the saturation and you see jumping off the picture all the highlights. When I click Cobalt, the accuracy is on top and even less brighter part of the image comes out in HDR range. Adobe, Cobalt, and SDR, HDR. Sometimes on backlight image, this is almost it's a fully backlight image with some pulling shadow, pushing whites. When you do the HDR, you basically see the details coming out from the highlights part. And when you use the Cobalt, you see the amount it's increasing, but that's the limit of my monitor. It's going, you see the difference? The amount of the details and the color accuracy is higher, but my monitor is not capable, so I need to reduce it. And we can start again. Adobe, Cobalt. Adobe, Cobalt. So now the limit is my hardware. Skin tone. This is a backlight, basically. The light is on my back. I took the picture at time was something like 10 o'clock in the morning on winter in London. And the light was coming from my back. Basically a bath of light on this picture. And HDR is clearly pushing big part of the image. If I change to Cobalt, you see the difference. Accuracy of the colors, and also the picture is richer, a lot richer. And before and after doesn't need any explanation. This is a very hard picture because in Iceland sometimes when you don't have sun and you see the blue ice, the blue lagoon, you see the contrast are not so high, so strong. Let's keep in as shots. Adobe HDR. As before the reduction of the saturation because the extension is bigger, I change to Cobalt standard and the saturation comes back with more details and more. You see that. More realistic texture coming from this image. Different light. This is so nice. This is a picture, famous place. Everybody knows this place. And as we can see, we have a burnt part of the image. Of course, HDR help us on that. But that is, I suppose, is not the perfect image to show us the effect. Here on Adobe, it's coming out from, this is the perfect subject, a car, a shiny car. And in Adobe you can see the effect. When you get change with Cobalt, we see the jump. So Cobalt and Adobe. Cobalt. You see here the Portobello area from Adobe to Cobalt. It's completely different, the reproduction of the colors and the shades. For landscapers, that it's a good reference. After the sunset, because the sun is already gone, we see the lights coming on the back of the Etna mountain. In HDR, we see the reduction of the saturation like other image before. When you change it Cobalt, everything is on the perfect sides. You see the shadows, the highlights perfectly calibrated, and the shades of color are embracing the sunset. Before and after, before and after. When you see the after, before, honestly, seems to be a log image. Even here, let's keep on a shot. Adobe, image becomes alive. Honestly, that it's the kind of image that jump outside the screen, but our profile gives a lot more. And as the backlight on the city of London. Here the limit, as you can see, is our screen. Let's check Adobe and Cobalt. As you can see, Adobe is extending only the highlights. Cobalt, it's extending a bigger part of highlights and the middle range as well. That's the difference. Adobe, Cobalt. As before, if we push HDR, boom, the image is gone. If I set the HDR with Adobe, I see burnt part of the image because we are outside the histogram, visible histogram, so I need to reduce it more I can. I'm trying to, and I did that. I think when I push it on Cobalt, even we reduce the exposure, the difference it's night and day, because as I said before, this is pushing only the highlights. This it's pushing lower than highlights on the mid range. That's why you see this big difference. Without the HDR, nice image, but not alive. With the HDR, wow. Honestly, wow. The effect with the big aperture lens, this specific selective focus and the lights so perfectly reproduced on the screen, it's awesome. To be honest, it's awesome. I can go back, honestly. Another point that make me thinking I will work on HDR from now on, it's on Mediterranean lights, daylight, so very strong and harsh light during the day, you see the big jump. Sorry, I can't bear with that. When you see this image on SDR using Adobe, you push HDR. It's not a big deal. If I change to Cobalt, something bigger, but not so strong, the difference. Checking the histogram and keeping everything inside the range allowed by our monitor, we can see the difference. Boom. That's Cobalt standard in HDR, the Spectre standard. That's Adobe. Indoor, church, museum, where the windows are big enough to change our composition, you see another big perk on HDR. Picture becomes alive thanks to the windows. And on that, Cobalt, Spectre as the lead. Another type of photos. This is Millennium Bridge, typical common picture in London. In the night, and on that, of course, highlights start shining in HDR with Adobe. Using Cobalt, the whole bridge starts shining. You see? Same here. Adobe with Cobalt. The area is bigger and the color prediction is perfect. Every picture becomes stronger and alive. Every picture. This is another kind of picture that honestly deserve the HDR, an HDR screen. Adobe does its job, but Cobalt impressed with its job. And here we need to recover a bit if you want to see the details. That's it, perfect. Adobe, Cobalt. This picture is quite important to define something else. We are sick about dynamic range, highlight recovery, and these numbers that we look in websites once a new camera comes out in the market. Last one was the A7R6 compared to the GFX and the others, because the dynamic range seems to be higher just by 0.1 point. On this picture, there is a shocking reality. This picture has been taken using an M9 camera by Leica with a 1.2 lens. So that means a CCD camera with a maximum shutter time of 1/4000. On sunlight, this is a barn picture. You can try to recover it, but you know, it's weird. Okay, with an HDR monitor, you click and you have your outside the histogram part because the monitor limit. When you recover it, and you can recover it, you see that the information is not gone. The picture is shining, and using Cobalt, the picture is awesome. To be honest, the quality is impressive. As I said before, 1.2 with the HDR screen, it's an incredible combination, because the separation of the depth of field with the quality of the lights and the reproduction of the lights together are impressive to my eyes. The same camera, M9, same lens, I think. As a starting image, the helmet, you see, it's shining, and our profile gives more justice to the final picture without weight. It's even a calmer image like this in HDR changed, and our profile made the jump. Standard, Adobe, standard. Details like this scene is not under a very shiny light, but a car full of details, metal details, gives something to the picture. And our profile is telling the story without weight. Same here under the sunlight. HDR, Adobe, or HDR without weight. This on Crosby, backlight, strong backlight. 1, Spectre 2. We can recover this part and still enjoying the final result. Streets, you can use it and you enjoy this if you want. Another field is animal photography. If you see the whiter part of the skin of the flower, you see that the dog is even without the sunlight, the effect is still awesome. You can pass your day checking all your picture and enjoying them like the first time you do that. This is a night picture. It's an experiment I did in Iceland with a Leica M10. I was very lucky, to be honest. This is a goosebump moment. And HDR, you see the details? Look this detail with HDR by Adobe. If we put a Cobalt and we keep everything inside the range, you can enjoy the variety of colors of that magnificent effect. Still Iceland, eyes white. And what do you do with HDR? You enjoy it. The same here, even without the sunlight. Florence, City Hall. A normal picture with a nice dynamic range, some shadows, some highlights. Reproduction becomes 3D. London, Jerkin as well. Germany. Inside that church, you click the button and you see the lights coming from outside. You click with Cobalt and everything becomes more contrasty and defined. Colorful German city as well. Neuschwanstein Castle, the inspiration for Walt Disney. And many others. Basel, everything with metal. Even smaller details. Look how the image becomes alive. As I said before, Mediterranean modes or Atlantic modes. We are in Arrecife. You see, we give justice to the picture. And to this picture as well. Cars, shiny, nice colored cars, and sunlight. The perfect combination. Without weight. If you take picture for passion of cars, that can be outside your workflow, honestly. Animals as well. A normal classic scene. Your eyes, when you take a picture, enjoy this shiny effect on the leaves. When you take a picture and you see your monitor, the monitors basically shade everything because the limited dynamic range. With the HDR, you enjoy it. With our profile, you enjoy more. This is without and wait. HDR. We can continue. That's quite important image. As a landscape shooter, I personally start shooting these kind of pictures because I love the light coming from the sun on sunset. But it's always a problem to be able to enjoy it on a screen because the limited dynamic range. And I like to keep the push of the highlights. So I keep the highlights a bit outside the histogram sometimes just to see the shiny effect. But I can enjoy it until I push HDR. This is the Adobe. You see the image is becoming alive, but with our profile. And I remember I'm not even touching the white balance, because if you know Spectre, you know how strong is the effect when you use the right white balance. So without the white balance setting, I just push Cobalt Standard, and that is the scenery I photographed, not the one before. Not this, but this. Deserve a picture. Of course, it's a bit higher. I can reduce it once I take the picture. Portraits, another one. Adobe, Cobalt. And again, difference in bursing. This is another important picture, reflection. You see these elements, the steel element, it's reflecting the sky. On my back we have a blue sky in front of us with some clouds. When I click HDR, something happens, but not exactly what I expect. When I click Cobalt, I see the blue I have in my back reflecting on this part. Without weight. And with Adobe, basically you lose all the color. Another very shiny bright image. Another Leica. Reduced dynamic range, someone say. Yes, but with HDR and with the Cobalt HDR, that's not a problem. Without weight. HDR with Adobe, HDR with Cobalt. And that, it's clearly a bigger part of image compared to Adobe. Last image, this is another one with 1.0 lens on Sony, yes, with the T-chart. We see linear, not linear, sorry, the SDR, the HDR, and the Cobalt. Last two are coming from iPhone 17 Pro Max with a telecamera, so the telecamera, and captured with, this is a preview, let's say the preview, with an app we're developing, hoping to release soon. So you can see 48 megapixel of details, and with the HDR something happened, but only with Cobalt Spectre for iPhone everything changed. The jump is impressive. Adobe, Cobalt, Cobalt SDR, Cobalt HDR. The same here. HDR, Adobe, Cobalt. We can reduce a bit because we are quite outside, but the impact, it's impressive. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have comments or questions about it, please don't hesitate to ask, to write an email or to write under this video. Thank you very much. See you soon.